Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of College Football Tuesday. I'm your host, Larry Frank, and as always, my co-host from the Blue Blood, Zach McKinnell. Zach, how you doing today, buddy?
Not too bad, man. Not too bad. How about yourself?
You know, I'm doing great, and I'm going to tell you what, and Zach, I know you'll agree with me. You talk about a week of upsets again in college football. Just incredible. And later on, when we talk about the upcoming games, you know, I think it's safe enough to say I think we're going to see a couple happen again this week. But, you know, what we're going to do now is one of the big games that happened this weekend, Zach, we were both looking forward to, and I have the colors down bottom. The Wake Forest colors was, you know, had to be an upset. North Carolina over number 9 Wake Forest in what you said was going to be a shootout. And you called it exactly right, because a shootout it was. But when you look at this game, you know, what was it? 24 points in the fourth quarter. UNC, I said they were going to need to run the ball if they had a chance. I said Ty Chandler was going to basically need to go off this game. And what did Ty Chandler do? He only rushed for 213 yards, scored 4 times. And UNC the whole day seemed to be running the ball at will, rushing for over 300 yards in this game. But even in a loss, you got to give Sam Hartman credit. Yes, I know his 2 interceptions cost Wake Forest dearly in this game. Here's a guy, 7 touchdowns in the game, 5 in the air, 2 on the ground, 398 yards. And, you know, when you look at this game, and we're going to have Lary Sorenson on in a minute with us, when you look at this game, Zach, luckily, it really didn't cost Wake Forest much as far as at the ACC title, because they go up this week against NC State, which we're going to discuss in detail later, which really is going to have a major effect on what goes on in the ACC. Talk about this game. What did you see? I mean, Wake Forest in a shootout, and they probably can expect another shootout this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, so I mean, the reason it didn't affect anything is this was technically a non-conference matchup, even though they're both in the ACC. They agreed to play non-conference. But I mean, for me, you look at how crazy it was. I mean, over 1,100 total yards, 66 first downs, 8 different lead changes throughout the game, and really, truly, it came down to which defense could make a stop. And that interception by Cameron Kelly early in the fourth quarter really shifted the momentum toward UNC. And then they just ran Todd Chandler until the wheels fell off. And I mean, he was averaging almost 10 yards per carry. And then Sam Howell early, you got, as much as, you know, it was Todd Chandler's show late, early in the game, Sam Howell made some plays outside the pocket that really set the tone for UNC this weekend. I mean, he was running through tackles and spin. I mean, he was doing everything he could to carry this offense. And when I look at Wake Forest, man, you can't really blame Sam Hartman. I mean, 400 yards passing, 5 touchdowns, the 2 picks really cost them. But then also a guy who I was really impressed with was Jaquari Robinson at wide receiver. I mentioned him in my preview as one of the players to watch. He had over 100 catches, 100 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. And for me, it just came down to Wake Forest's defense couldn't make enough plays down the stretch to win the game. And that's really what was the difference between them and the Tar Heels this weekend.
And it almost came down to a battle of penalties. I mean, each team, 11 penalties in this game. And you think about it, if you take those penalties away, how much more yardage would have been. I think each team had 100 yards in penalties. So even though it was a shootout, it wasn't what you would call a well-played game overall. But let's go in and let's do this. Let's go in and bring in Wake Forest football and baseball analyst. He played in the major leagues, a former pitcher in the major leagues. We're trying to get his name spelled correctly because for some reason he decided only to include one R in it. I'm not sure what happened there, Larry. But let's welcome in Lary Sorenson. Larry, how you doing?
I'm doing just fine, and thank you for that warm introduction. Somehow, mysteriously, that R disappeared at the hospital, and it's been a pain in my backside my entire life.
And, you know, it's funny because when Larry played in the late 70s, that was a time I was turning to be a teenager, and I remember Larry real well with the Brewers. He made the All-Star team, I believe. It was in the late 70s. I'm just trying to remember if I'm accurate. But he spelled his name with one R. And that's what caught me on the baseball card. You know, Topps was big. Larry in the Brewers card had one R. And I used to tell my mom, this guy spells his name wrong. Is this card worth money because it's spelled wrong? Then they told me that he actually spelled it right. So, and
yeah, what's really funny is they have a collector's card out there of me with 2 R's in my name. And
is it really?
That's the one that has become the collector's item.
Wow. Larry, let's talk about, well, you know, I'm definitely going to want to have you on again when we can talk some baseball during the baseball season. But, you know, let's talk some Wake Forest football. You know, I don't know if I would say devastating, but a tough, heartbreaking loss for the Demon Deacons over the weekend. They were undefeated. But it's still a team, when you look at them, as Zach said in the intro, that pretty much controls their own destiny. They got North Carolina State this weekend, another big in-state rivalry. They got Boston College and they got Clemson. It's safe to say that this team, even with that loss, is still in very good shape.
Well, the loss doesn't hurt them at all conference-wise. So going for the conference championship, they're still the only team in the league that is 5-0 that doesn't have a defeat inside the conference. North Carolina State sitting at 4-1 right behind them, obviously, is what makes this weekend so important. So it was very disappointing, and the analysis that you guys did was spot on about the game itself. Was at the Dave Clawson press conference today, and then just finished up the Dave Clawson show with Stan Cotton, who is the play-by-play man for the last 26 years at Wake Forest. And Dave Clawson was very disappointed by the penalties, mostly because it's uncharacteristic. His team averages about 5 penalties and 48 yards or so per game in penalties, and they had a couple personal fouls. They had some roughing penalties that were very uncharacteristic of his team, and that was what was really disappointing. The 55 points, you know, that's kind of what you've come to expect from Wake Forest. They're the only team in the country that has scored 35 points or more in every game that they've played this year. They're averaging about 44 points per game. So the offense wasn't surprising. The defense was disappointing. The penalties especially disappointing.
Well, Larry, if you look at before the season, if you go back a couple of months, before the season started, everybody was saying, watch out for NC State. Watch out for North Carolina. And I don't think any of us predicted the downfall of Clemson was going to be this drastic this year. Did you ever expect in your wildest imagination that Wake Forest would be sitting where they are today in the conference?
We really had a feeling that it could be a special year. The motto was good to great. So it was like, let's get from the 7-5 into a 8-4, 9-3 scenario. And I think the two big stories for the year in the conference is the underachievement of Clemson, as you mentioned, and then Wake Forest is certainly a great story. The thing that really happened, and you know, if there was a good byproduct of the COVID, is that they got the super seniors. They had 9 players that came back for that super senior year. Wake Forest actually has one player, Miles Fox, that's in his 7th year of college football. So the fact that they've gotten that leadership from the older guys has really made a big difference for the Wake Forest team this year. And I think that's what's going to get them past the extremely disappointing loss to NC State or to North Carolina and get them ready for NC State this weekend.
Talk about Sam Hartman. I mean, obviously a tremendous talent, but talk about not just what he's meant to Wake Forest, but how you watch him week in and week out, Larry. How would you rate him compared to the current other quarterbacks in college football?
Well, first of all, break some news on your show. Sam shaved his beard, so he will be beardless for NC State this. Although with Sam, it grows back pretty well, and he might match you guys by the weekend because it comes back pretty good for him. But, he's been amazing. And I think the big difference, he has matured. The loss to Wisconsin last year in the bowl game, where he had a horrific 3-minute period where he threw 3 interceptions. I think he matured from that devastation. And he learned that you've just got to get right back on the horse and get right back into it. And he's been a very confident leader. We believe that he compares with any of the quarterbacks in the country. There's a stat out there right now that there are 7 players in the country that have 200 plus yards rushing, have over 2,500 yards passing, and there are 7 of them in the country, and 5 of them are in the ACC. So the play in the ACC this year has just been unbelievable. That group of quarterbacks have been outstanding, and Sam, numbers-wise, is right in with anybody in that group.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And like you said, you got Devin Leary, who he's going to be playing against next week. He played against Sam Howell last week. Just great talent here in North Carolina. But you just came back from doing a show, you said, with Coach Dave Clawson. And Dave, I think he's been here now, if I'm correct, I'm just going by memory, 2013-ish. He started with the program at Wake Forest. Talk about the turnaround with Wake Forest, and obviously he's a big part of it, but talk about what it is about Dave that is able to motivate and execute and get these kids to give it their all and just, exceed expectations.
Well, it is his 8th year, and when he first came here, it was a defensive club. They were better on defense than offense. And with Warren Ruggiero, they have turned his offensive coordinator, they've turned that around into becoming a real offensive powerhouse. And the receiving core that they've got, I think you'd be hard-pressed to go almost any place else in the country and find 3 guys as good as the 3 that they've got with Roberson and Terry and Perry and Morin. And you got to realize that Donovan Green, who was supposed to be their number 1 receiver this year, has been out for the year because he had a knee injury before the season started. He was supposed to be the featured receiver. Give a lot of credit to Kevin Higgins, the receivers coach in the NFL with the Detroit Lions for a little while. Matter of fact, when he coached with the Detroit Lions, which is my hometown, he lived out in the Northville area, and my son and Kevin Higgins' son played on the same high school football team, and Tim Higgins set all kinds of high school records, and my son Mark was the quarterback throwing the balls to him. So we go back into the mid-2000s, and Kevin Higgins has just done a fabulous job making Wake Forest kind of receiver and really an offensive team. Now, the thing about Dave Clawson, and I've said this many times, he's the kind of guy that when you say there's a problem and this is the problem, he comes up with 4 solutions and he's got 4 or 5 reasons for each solution. And he analyzes all the way through all of those. And Warren Ruggiero is exactly the same way. So they always have solid reasoning for what they do. They've got a solid program, a solid offense that's just a little bit unusual with that slow mesh that they run, which is enough to keep other teams on their toes and preparing for something differently when they get ready for Wake Forest.
Zach, go ahead and jump in there, buddy.
Yeah, so the one critique that a lot of people have had about Wake Forest is the defense and the consistency of stopping. People point to the Army game, they point to this weekend. For you, what's been the missing component? And for you, what do they need to do moving forward to be more consistent on the defensive side of the ball?
Well, certainly defense is a problem, and you acknowledge that, and they've had trouble stopping the run. There's no question about that. One of the things that happens is that it's inherently built into the offense that they score quickly. It's not a time of possession type team. Against Army, they scored 70 points with 17 minutes and 17 seconds of possession. And when you score that quickly, your defense is back on the field right away, and your defense is a little bit tired. One of the things that they try to do, and one of the things that Clausen has really emphasized this year, is build up the depth and try to get more interchangeable parts and try to give guys more equal playing time and build up the role players that are playing behind the starters. And he's done that with some success in some different groups. They've also had some injury problems in a couple of groups, which really cuts into your depth as well. And again, Wake Forest, the smallest school in the Power 5 conferences, one of the smallest schools enrollment-wise in the entire FBS. And so they've had to not had quite all the resources in the past. Really tough academic school, about the 28th ranked school in the nation as far as academics go, and they don't let you slide. It's a tough school to get into. It's a tough school to stay in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like on my show, we've actually had Stan Cotton on the show multiple times and communicate with him, love him. And, we talked this preseason about recruiting at Wake Forest, how tough it is and, where the recruiting was going under Clausen. For you, how big is this season and the success in the ACC and a potential ACC championship? How much does that help Clausen and this staff succeed on the recruiting trail right now?
Well, no question that everything that they've done this year, being ranked number 9 in the college football poll that came out last week, was certainly very, very important. And by the way, I'm sitting in Stan's office at his house right now. I stay with him when I come into town and to do the games or to do special shows like tonight. And I won't show you the Cowboys helmet that he's got up on the wall, but I'm at Stan's house right now. And it certainly is important because you get into different living rooms, and for a while it was considered a development program where you took the 2 and 3 star guys. And for example, and we've seen it with Kenneth Walker, the young man that went to Michigan State. He didn't have a Power 5 conference scholarship offer until Wake Forest did. Now he's got a chance to be the Heisman Trophy winner, albeit in a different school. But a lot of that comes down to Dave Clausen recruits the type of player that knows that there are going to be 3 running backs in his offense, that knows there's going to be 6 to 7 defensive linemen rotating on a regular basis. So you need an unselfish player with tremendous academics that is going to do all the right things in school, as well as all the little things around the football program. But they're getting into the 3, 4s and the occasional 5s living room now, if you believe in that tracking system with the star system. And quite honestly, the Wake Forest folks don't believe in that a whole lot. They think some of it, if you're a 3 coming to Wake Forest, you'd be a 4 if you were at NC State or North Carolina or Clemson or some other places. Those things can be judged. They can be very interestingly varied at times.
Yeah, and so my final question too, let's say they win out, they win the ACC, get to a New Year's Six Bowl. What would that mean just for the program and the community surrounding the program to finally break through and get that ACC championship?
They've clinched a bowl game already this year, which will be 6 in a row. They're 3rd in the conference behind Clemson and Miami in longevity of a streak of that nature. And so they've proven to recruits and to everybody else that they are going to be extremely competitive and be in bowl games at the end of the year. Going to a New Year's Day Bowl, you're exactly right. Takes it to a different level. The Orange Bowl in 2006, I'm looking around at pictures of it in Stan's office right now. Certainly was a big deal. But you know how fans are and you know how people are. You get there and, okay, well, you lost. Why did you lose? We thought 13-0 was a possibility. So the standards change, and as they should. The more you accomplish, the more people hold your feet to the fire and the more that they expect. But that's what every athlete wants anyway. You want to compete against the best. You want to compete with important games in the month of November is the goal every year.
Yeah, absolutely. Larry, talk about the reshuffling or the realignment, the movement of a lot of these teams. I mean, we've seen more this year that's going to be happening in the near future. What do you think that does for college football? And is it, in your opinion, a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, as you can probably tell by taking one little peek at me, I'm kind of an old school guy. I played baseball at the University of Michigan back in the mid 70s, 74, 5, and 6, and the Bo Schembechler era, in the Woody Hayes era, and the Big Ten when it was 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And I really enjoy and love the big rivalries. And I don't think that a rivalry is based on the fact that you had 2 close games the last 2 seasons. To me, rivalries are built up over a period of time. And that longevity has always been one of the beautiful things, I think, of college football. So to me personally, it's a little bit disappointing to see teams moving around conference to conference and the reshuffling. And when you see the long histories with all the great names, it's a little bit disappointing. On the other hand, things change. I take a look at this thing, and there's more computing power in here than we put a man on the moon with. And you just have to accept the fact that things change. And if you want to be a part of it, you either get on the bus or you get run over by the bus. And so you adapt and you change with it and deal the hand that you're dealt with.
Now we see the college football polls and the top 4 teams, and every year there's disagreement, as from here and there. But at the end of the day, you look at a team like, let's say, Cincinnati, who just barely won, I know, this weekend in a tough game. But for this reason alone, do you think, and I know no matter how many teams you have in a playoff system, there's always going to be somebody feel they're left out, whether it's 2 teams, 4 teams, 6 teams, 8 teams. It don't matter. But do you think this is a good explanation of why we maybe should go to an 8-team format in college football?
Well, I absolutely think that they have to expand, because I think that on the playing field is the right place to settle in. It's the right place to give teams like Cincinnati an opportunity to prove themselves and work their way through. And if we're doing it at other levels of college football, I really don't understand why we can't have the some similar type of playoff format to get by in the FBS system. And Stan and I kind of disagree about that just a tiny little bit. But I think there are ways to work it out. And I think you absolutely have to give a team like Cincinnati or a team like Wake Forest, because I'm not so sure if Wake Forest had gone 13-0, I'm not entirely sure they would have had a bid into that Final Four. And I think it would have been disgraceful if they hadn't, because they played teams. And I think that people are mistaking the fact that some of the good teams in the ACC conference, in the ACC, didn't have great years, are mistaking that with all the teams aren't as good, because Clemson struggled some. And I think that if you take a look at it with the players being older, as we talked about before, I think Wake Forest is playing the best. Certainly, I've been here 5 years, and it's the best football team they've had. And I feel like they deserve all the accolades and accomplishments that they've earned.
Well, this is breaking news. They're ranked 12th in the new poll.
Is that where it came out? I thought 13th might be the number. I hit it on the head the first week with 9. So 12th is. I have been running around tonight and didn't have a chance to see that yet. So thanks.
Yeah, they just dropped it. It's live right now. I just have it on my other monitor so we could talk about. But yeah, you guys only fell 3 spots because I think Baylor losing and some other teams behind Wake Forest really helped.
And Michigan State.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, I went to Michigan. My kids went to Michigan State. And so I follow an awful lot of different teams and Wake Forest, of course, that I work for. I follow a lot of teams during the course of the winter.
Now, before we let you run, Larry, let's talk about this weekend's matchup. North Carolina State this upcoming week. Obviously, you mentioned how big of a game it is. Talk about the matchup, and are we looking at possibly another shootout like Wake Forest had versus North Carolina last week?
I don't think that it'll be quite that high, although I won't be surprised a bit if Wake Forest gets into the 40s. I certainly think that they're capable of that. It's an explosive team that can pick on any one mistake that their opponents make and hit for big plays. Sam Hartman loves to throw the ball downfield. He's got one of the highest per pass averages in the country. He's got one of the highest per completion downfield averages in the country. It's a big play team. It's designed to be a big play team with multiple receivers. I think that North Carolina State's defense is going to be better than what they faced the last few weeks. And so they're going to have their hands full. They need to establish the run enough to keep North Carolina State honest and gain enough yardage up front. Having Christian Beal-Smith iffy for the game is certainly a drawback for Wake. That'll be a game-time decision. I think that the offense is capable. What I like about the North Carolina State offense is Leary just doesn't make mistakes. He's so efficient with the football. And I said this during the press conference today, or during our little meeting afterwards. The baseball analogy is, if you're going to miss the strike zone, miss outside or miss inside. Don't miss over the plate. And so he doesn't throw a lot of balls up for grabs that can be intercepted. He's only got 3 for the season. And he's just a terrific quarterback, not going to beat you with his legs the way that Howell did in the first half against North Carolina.
Well, listen, Larry, both Zach and I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule. Once baseball season starts, love to have you back on. We can talk some Wake Forest baseball, as well as, go over some of the highlights of your career in the major leagues as well.
Well, I've played for 7 teams, so there's plenty of stories from each one of them. Be glad to do it, guys. Feel free to reach out anytime, and thank you very much for the invitation. I enjoyed talking with you.
All right, and good luck this weekend.
Thank you. Should be a great one.
It will. Thank you again, my friend. All righty, that was Lary Sorenson, Wake Forest football and baseball analyst, who also was a former major leaguer. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, we already recapped the North Carolina Wake Forest game. We're going to recap some other games that happened last week, and then we're going to preview. It's just a slew of games that are interesting, to say the least, that are coming up this weekend. We'll be back right after this. Ladies and gentlemen, the other day I'm looking around and I'm saying, I need to become part of a Carolina Panthers group that stays positive even in these tough times. And I'll tell you what, boy, have I found a group, the Carolina Panthers Den. It's on Facebook and you need to join today. This is a group that stays positive, has a good time, and interacts with a lot of other different Carolina Panthers fans. If you want to have a great time and talk about your team, encourage your team in a way that is done very professionally, then become a member of the Carolina Panthers Den on Facebook. Make sure to join today. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Frankly Speaking Sports. I'm your host, Larry Frank, along with Zach McKinnell. Zach, what do you say we run down some of the games from last week real quickly? Got some notes here. Let me get back to, there we go. And we're going to start out with, here we go. We already went over North Carolina, Wake Forest. The other game is a very, somewhat of a surprise. The Illini going ahead and defeating Minnesota by the score of 14-6. Chase Brown, 150 yards. Minnesota, didn't really, they were sacked 6 times. Minnesota had 2 turnovers, and Chase Brown had an incredible game, like I said. And Minnesota only 3 of 13 on third down.
Yeah, for me, it was really a collapse for PJ Fleck's team. Minnesota's been playing really well since dropping 2 early games this season, and they've really like a different team. But for me, the strength of schedule wasn't there, and Illinois is just one of those teams this year where if you don't come ready to stop the run and play in a physical defensive game, you're not going to be ready. And you got to give Illinois a credit. They are taking on Brett Bielema's identity. Bielema was known for those physical Wisconsin teams, the physical Arkansas teams, and he's brought that mindset and culture to Illinois. And I'm so impressed with what I've seen from Illinois this year. And personally, Illinois is one of the dark horses moving forward in the Big Ten in the coming years. So I really think Brett Bielema is making a real change over there for the Fighting Illini.
I'm just reading a message now. I finally got one of your messages. I just got that, man. I'm serious.
Oh, no,
I
you're
don't know
good.
You all right?
Yeah, we're all good, man.
Okay.
But yeah, so this is the one I wanted to talk about,
Right, and
man.
I wanted to go get your opinion on it. This is what I call the Aiden O'Connell show. I mean, because that's really was what. Listen to some of this, Zach. Amazing. Purdue, 11 of 18. 11 of 18
Yep.
on third down. O'Connell, 536 yards through the air. He was the offense. 3 touchdowns. How about David Bell? We talked about him last week, how he teams up so well with O'Connell. He had 11 receptions, 217 yards, a touchdown. Kenneth Walker was the same as usual, 146 yards for Michigan State, but Purdue scored. This is the amazing thing. 7 red zone possessions. They scored 7 times when they were in the red zones. And this is Purdue's second victory, I believe, this year over a top 10, a team that was ranked in the top 10. And I think that's the first time they did it since 1984. Purdue is one of those teams, they don't necessarily stay ranked, but they're a good competitive team. And what can you say about Aiden O'Connell?
Well, actually, they jumped to 16 in this past ranking tonight. They jumped all the way up into the top 20. So this is a ranked team now. And I just want to say this. This was the 17th time, man, that Purdue has beaten a top 5 team as an unranked team. How terrifying is that? 17 times. That's the most in the country for any program. And they've done it 17 times. And now it puts them right in the thick of a Big Ten race. You mentioned Aiden O'Connell throwing it 54 times for 500 yards. David Bell is a problem at wide receiver. Every single game that Purdue wins that they're not supposed to, David Bell has an all-world performance. Give that man his credit. 200 yards receiving, man, with almost 20 yards per catch. 20 yards per catch and a receiving touchdown. And you mentioned it. They won. So they're the only team I think I know that can win the time of possession battle by 35 minutes and not run the ball a single lick. They're throwing the ball, winning the time of possession battle against the Heisman leading running back in Kenneth Walker. Talk about Jeff Brom having one hell of a game plan. And for the Spartans, the question marks finally came up to them. Their secondary came up giving up almost 300 yards per game through the air. That was the wrong problem to have against this passing attack with Aiden O'Connell. Kenneth Walker had a big day. But for me, man, got to give Purdue credit. The defense wasn't spectacular, but they made plays when they needed to. They were strong in the red zone, and Purdue just making play after play after play. When it's time to put everything on the table, the stars and the leaders of Purdue always go all in. And I think that's the difference between them and a lot of these top programs. And people, you've got to stop overlooking Purdue because they are going to get you if you don't play your 100%.
Absolutely. And, probably the most disappointing game for me that I was disappointed in this weekend had to be the Texas A&M Auburn game. I mean, coming into this game, Auburn pretty much controlled their own destiny in the SEC. But when you talk about probably the worst offensive game you can imagine, Bo Nix didn't have a game, 2 turnovers. Nix was sacked 4 times in this game. I mean, and no running game. And, that's the thing. They needed, and we talked about it, if they could have took a blueprint from the previous week and brought it over into this game, they had a very good chance of winning. And this is the first time, I think, this year that I've seen Bo Nix not live up to, what I thought he was capable of versus a team like Texas A&M.
Listen, spanked us. Pulled our pants down in front of the 109,000 in Kyle Field and spanked the Auburn Tigers on national TV. That's what happened Saturday. I mean, it was a game that played perfectly into what A&M is. Their quarterback gets banged up, and what it is a defensive battle. And A&M quietly has the second best scoring defense in the country behind Georgia right now. quietly, but Jimbo Fisher's turned this team into a defensive powerhouse. In a game, 11 punts, 2 missed field goals, three turnovers, and 9 total points in the first 3 quarters of the game, man.
Yeah,
and the defense.
Let's not forget, give credit where credit is due. The rushing game of A&M with Isaiah Spiller had 100 and something yards rushing at him, and I think the entire team had over 200 yards rushing. So their game plan, running the clock, using the clock, everything about, like you said, the game plan with Jumbo. But you couldn't have picked a worse game for Auburn to play with so much on the line. I just expected so much more. And, every team has it, that's why football has been so great this year. But I guess probably the most political word to use is probably a disappointing performance by Auburn.
Yeah, it was disappointing. And listen, I want to give credit. I was tough on Zach Calzada for him to get hit like he did, look in bad a shape, and for him to come in and play the rest of the game and lead this team to a win was huge. And then Devin Achane, Isaiah Spiller, they had big games on the ground. I mean, Achane averaged almost 10 yards per carry. And for the Tigers, the offensive line, the wide receivers, everything just got all out of sort. The offensive line couldn't protect Nicks. There were no rushing lanes. The wide receivers were dropping passes. It was a perfect game plan for the A&M defense, and horrible execution by the Auburn offense.
Yeah. And another game, one that I was a little pleased with, the post Gary Peterson era, I guess you can call it, at TCU. TCU came into this game, and first of all, give their defense credit. They forced 2 turnovers, quite a few punts in this game, but Chandler Morris, keeps getting week after week after week. Seems like he's progressing, had 461 yards, 2 touchdowns, despite Abram Smith of Baylor having 125 yards rushing, but and also I think Baylor, Tyquan Thornton again, 2 touchdowns. Yeah. But if you look at this game, once again, don't look at the box score. 13 penalties by TCU, and they still won that ball game. It just goes to show you. But they came out and they looked like the Horned Frogs were ready to play. It's almost like they had a purpose. And I don't know what they were playing for, but whatever it was, great job by them defeating a pretty tough Baylor team.
Listen, this was a huge win for TCU. You just fire your legendary coach and Gary Patterson, and you come out and beat a top 12 team that many people thought were going to be the biggest threat to Oklahoma for the Big 12. I give all the props in the world to that TCU squad for not giving up and not giving up on their season. And it shows, man, that what's the one thing Gary Patterson is known for? Defense. That defense, regardless if he's there, is talented, and they did enough to win. They made the proper stops. They forced Baylor into some mistakes and some inconsistencies. And listen, let's give all the props in the world to Chandler Morris. To step into that role and have the game he did and find a way to get this Horned Frogs team to win was huge. So I was very, very impressed with TCU. And you also got to wonder, was Baylor overlooking this game because they just fired their coach? They're starting a freshman quarterback. Were they overlooking it for their Oklahoma game this weekend, coming to McLean Stadium in Waco? I have a lot of questions on whether they were focused on this game, but it was a huge win for TCU and those kids.
Yeah, definitely was. And if I'm correct, wasn't that Chandler Morris's first start?
Yep, his first ever start came in and played like that.
Yep.
Because he just transferred from Oklahoma this offseason.
Right. Yep. Now, let me ask you this question. If I told you that a team would outgain another team 612 total yards to 461, and then a team only had that score didn't have the most yardage there, only had the ball for 13 minutes of the game, and they won, would you believe me? That's exactly what Tennessee did over Kentucky. this week. And, give Hendon Hooker credit, 4 touchdown passes, 316 yards. But they were outgained 612 yards to 461, and Tennessee only had the ball for 13 minutes, 52 seconds. But you got to give credit to Tennessee's defense when it counted. Alante Taylor, big pick 6 in the third quarter that gave the Vols a 10-point lead, and the rest is history. Big, big win by Tennessee, who goes and plays Georgia this upcoming week.
Yeah, sadly, Kentucky's not Georgia. I mean, sadly, Georgia's not Kentucky, so I don't think that means anything because Georgia's just that good, man, just between us. But, I mean, this was an impressive win. I think Josh Heupel has done an outstanding job for Tennessee. They've played really well this year. They were like one drive away from beating Ole Miss this year. That's a top team in the conference. They played Florida really well, and they were one play away from beating Pitt. That's a top 25 team. I really like where Tennessee is. They have some quarterback issues. And, the thing that people are forgetting is that they lost the most transfers in college football by like 20 kids. They lost like 40 or so transfers because of all the scandal that happened. And Josh Heupel's coming in with this and still winning games. And so you got to give Josh Heupel in Tennessee for not playing their best game and still finding a way to win. Shout out to them. Listen, Heupel and Beamer at South Carolina and Harsin at Auburn, these first-year hires have been performing. I'm impressed with all 3 of them, and this was a big win for the Volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, a game that was a big surprise, we'll go over it quickly, and then we'll wrap. That'll be the week wrap-up before we get into the games coming up next week. But Fresno State losing to Boise State. Not losing, really getting destroyed by Boise State. Fresno State was sacked 5 times in this game. Jake Heemer, 3 interceptions. The big one was the running back George Halani of Boise State had a good game with 117 yards. And Hank Bachmeier had a touchdown pass, 283 yards. But this was a team that, just got pretty much in the trenches, just lost this game, and Boise State just whooped them.
Listen, Boise State's had a tough year. Listen, losing Brian Harsin was a big loss. Andy Avalos has come in and done well. They've had a lot of injuries. They've had, they've had a lot of turnover, things like that. Like a lot has changed for Boise State this year, and a lot of people just thought they fell off. But this was a team that has consistently competed at the highest level of the Mountain West, and Fresno State's played extremely inconsistent this year. Their offense is on one week, their defense doesn't show up the next, and they haven't been able to put a full performance together. And it shows that Boise State still has legit talent, and you got to give the props to Avalos and that coaching staff for turning the season around with a giant win this weekend.
Absolutely. Let's take a quick 15-second station break. When Zach and I come back, we highlight this week's upcoming games. We'll be back right after this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to College Football Tuesday. I'm your host, Larry Frank, along with Zach McKinnell. Want to welcome all of you listening on Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Thank you so much for listening, everybody on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube. Thank you so much. And we're going to get right into the nitty-gritty. And I'm going to tell you what, this week has a slew of games that have a lot of potential to be good games. And you want to talk about 2 great quarterbacks. And these games, once again, guys and ladies, are in no specific order of importance, just the way we throw them up there and we talk about them. But, you got to look at Kenny Pickett and Sam Howell, 2 great quarterbacks right now in college football. Howell has 20 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Meanwhile, Pickett has thrown for over 300 yards, 29 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. But when you look at this game, Zach, I think the key again this week for North Carolina to be competitive is to take some pressure off Sam Howell and get Tyler Chandler running the ball like he did last week. And remember that this is a guy, Tyler Chandler, who also has 13 rushing touchdowns on the year.
Yeah, listen, this game I'm so excited for. And the one thing I'm worried about for these, it's really for me, I think this game is very similar to what we saw last week with Wake Forest and UNC. Which defense do you trust to make a stop? Because both of these quarterbacks are going to have big games. Both of these teams have explosive running games. I would be shocked if either of these teams didn't score over 35 points. They're going to put up major, major points. And for me, I've coming off the big win over Wake Forest, I really, really like where UNC is sitting. Pitt has been extremely inconsistent this year. And so this is going to be a Heisman moment for Kenny Pickett. And not only that, this is going to be an NFL draft moment for both of these quarterbacks. As when we get down to NFL draft time, they're going to look at this game and say, who played better than who? You know, I haven't decided who I'm going to take because I might cover this game for my channel. But right now, man, I'll be honest with you, I'm leaning toward UNC pulling the upset over Pitt this weekend.
Yeah, I agree with you actually on that one. Now, another great game, and like I said, there's many of them, has to be Michigan going up against Penn State. Now, overall, Zach, I think Michigan by far has a more balanced offense than Penn State. I don't think, but they got Hassan Haskins, who versus Indiana had 168 yards and averaged 6.2 yards per carry. But the key to this game for Michigan State is going to be Cade McNamara needs to go back to that game that he had 2 weeks ago and pretty much play like he did there, where I think it was versus actually Michigan State they played when he had a 383 yards, 2 touchdowns. And this is a kid that doesn't make a lot of mistakes with the football. So that's going to be the key. If it, you don't want a low scoring game versus Penn State. Michigan will put points on the board. The question is going to be, can Penn State keep up with Michigan State if Michigan State does put points on the board?
I think it's Michigan is playing Penn State this week.
It's Michigan. I don't know why.
So for me, looking at this game, the biggest, I guess, way it flows is that Michigan can run the ball. Penn State struggled to run against everybody. So can they be successful against this really good Michigan defense? That's what it's going to come down to. And for me, looking at this game right now, I just don't trust Sean Clifford to be able to be one-dimensional against this defense this weekend. And I have a feeling Michigan's going to control the clock, run the football, keep Cade McNamara off of making big decisions through the air, just trust him with his handful of throws. So for me, I personally see Michigan actually winning this game pretty convincingly this weekend.
We move on, my friend. Can your Auburn Tigers bounce back versus Mississippi? I will tell you it's simple. If they play like they did last week, no. Okay, if they play like they did 2 weeks ago, yes. The key, as always, is going to be Nix and Bigsby. Bigsby did not have a great game last game. Didn't even rush close to 100 yards. Nix did not look good. I think Auburn is a better team than Mississippi, but they have to stay consistent with the way they played 2 weeks ago and can't not have another disastrous display like they did last week.
Yeah, so for me, being in Jordan Hare is the biggest factor in this one. Playing at home, Auburn plays so differently. Mississippi State last week really struggled holding that Arkansas offense down. I think Tate Bigsby and those guys have a huge weekend with Jarquez Hunter. I think going back to Jordan Hare really helps out Auburn. And for me, I just don't trust Mississippi State's defense to make enough stops down the stretch. I think Auburn's front seven plays different at home. They're able to get after the quarterback. And so for me, I have Auburn pulling out a close one, but I would imagine this one's actually more high scoring than you think, just because I think both of these offenses have big days this weekend.
Then you get number 8 Oklahoma versus Baylor. Baylor 7-2. Oklahoma is still undefeated. And, say I'm crazy if you want, but I don't think Baylor has a chance in this game. I really, really don't. That's just my gut feeling. I mean, listen to this. Oklahoma, 9th in the country in points scored per game. Another amazing stat for Oklahoma's offense. Listen to this, Zach. Third down efficiency. They're 11th in the country at 50%. This is a team that knows how to sustain drives and knows how to score points. And I don't think Baylor is going to even come close in this game to keeping up with them. That's just my opinion. I love the running back for Baylor, Abram Smith. His last 3 games, 300-yard rushing games, but I think that Oklahoma offense is just going to be way too much for Baylor.
Listen, I agree. I released my preview for this today. I think the X factor is Caleb Williams and his scrambling ability. I mean, the way he plays outside the pocket, the way he can push the ball down the field, which is something that was really missing with Spencer Rattler, has really opened up this offense. And for me, with Baylor, I feel like they're going to try to control the clock. And I really like this front 7 to get some pressure on Bohannon. That Nick Bonito, not Mario Williams, but Winfrey, Perry and Winfrey, all these defensive linemen, they're going to get in the backfield a lot. I just think Oklahoma has too much firepower on the offensive side of the ball. So for me, I personally think Oklahoma wins this one as well, but I really don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it'll be probably a 1-score game. I just don't trust Baylor to consistently stop Oklahoma, but I do think early in the game, Dave Aranda is going to have a plan, a wrinkle in that defense to really throw off Oklahoma. So I think it'll be a big second half scoring game for the Sooners.
Now in our next game, the big question is going to be, can Aiden O'Connell and David Bell do enough to beat the number 5 ranked Ohio State Buckeyes? Now, this is a good Ohio State team. We know about CJ Stroud. How about Jackson Smith-Najiba? Last week, 15 receptions, 240 yards, a touchdown versus Nebraska. Now, Ohio State averages 44 points a game, 4th in the nation, 541 yards per game, 4th in the nation. Third down efficiency, you thought it was good for Oklahoma. How about 53.2% for 6th in the country? Yet, I have a feeling here. Purdue is on a high. They are playing with so much confidence right now. You just don't know on any given Saturday what can happen. And I'm just saying this game could be one of those to watch out for a possible upset.
Listen, man, it's like fool me once, like shame on me. Like I overlooked Purdue once, shame on me. Overlook them twice, or shame on them. Then like twice, shame on me. Then you can't overlook Purdue again, can you? There's no way Ohio State's going to walk in here and not expect any like. Come on, man. For me, I just think the whole game is up. I think Ohio State's going to come in focused. This game being in Columbus helps them. I just think personally, the difference between the 2 games Purdue's won with Iowa and Michigan State, I think Ohio State's too balanced on offense. I don't trust Purdue's defense to be able to stop them. And so for me, I have Ohio State winning this game. I just can't see personally Purdue pulling off their 3rd top 5 upset of the season, man. I feel like Ryan Day is going to have his team ready to go, and CJ Stroud has a huge day along with Travion Henderson.
The best team in the country by far, Georgia versus Tennessee. And listen to this, Georgia is only allowing 6.5 points per game. That's it. 6.5 points. We all know about Bennett, how he's been doing. The question is, I mean, you've seen Tennessee play last week. Herndon Hooker was played a good game. I just don't know this. As far as an upset goes, I would be very shocked if it happens. I don't ever want to say never because we've seen so much happen. But if Georgia goes into this game playing Tennessee, a tough SEC competitor, the way they should prevail.
Listen, man, like I told you, I don't even think this is going to be close. I think Georgia wins this one convincingly. I don't trust Tennessee's offense to move the ball, and I definitely don't trust Tennessee's defense to stop Georgia. I think Georgia wins this one probably, I would say 21 plus and running away. I don't even think it's close.
Then we got another good matchup. I told you a lot of them. 14 Texas A&M 7-2 versus Mississippi 7-2. And, you know, we all know Mississippi, what they bring to the table with Matt Corral. I know you were impressed with Calzada last week, who played a very good game. I just don't know. And one thing I would like to see more out of Calzada is more consistency. And, you know, this is a good test. Can he do it 2 weeks in a row? You know, that's the big question. You know, if they put pressure on Calzada, I think Calzada struggles in this game.
Yeah, that's the number one thing is can they get to the quarterback for Ole Miss? And they've done it pretty well this season, but it's going to be a real question if they can get pressure. Also, you got to stop the run game. Spiller and Achane are two of the best and most explosive running backs in the country. Yeah. And the other thing is, can Ole Miss move the ball? This is one of the best defenses in the country. And so can they move the ball? They're allowing less than 200 yards passing a game. They're slowing down the run game. Can Ole Miss move the football, and can they protect Matt Corral against one of the better rushing defenses in the SEC? That's going to be the question. Right now, I'm leaning toward Texas A&M pulling out a close one in Oxford over Ole Miss, though, just because I trust their defense to make that stop to win the game.
And then we're going to, at least I'm going to wrap up with the final game of the week that I chose, and it could be the best matchup of the week. We talked about it earlier with Lary Sorenson from Wake Forest, but NC State, Wake Forest, Leary versus Hartman, two great quarterbacks, another great state rivalry. This one, an ACC matchup, which here it is, roll the dice, here's all the marbles. Pretty good definition of who may come out on top in that division.
Yeah, so for me, I really like Wake Forest bouncing back. I think they knew they had that game last week, and they knew they really cost it with just some, I guess, uncharacteristic turnovers late in the game. I think they have a big offensive game this weekend, and personally, as good as Devin Leary is, I think Hartman's a little bit of a better QB than he is right this second. I think this game probably also another high-scoring game, like we just heard. Wake Forest has scored 35 or more points in every game this season. I have Wake Forest winning this one in a close one, just because I trust their offense to be a bit more consistent than I trust NC State.
Yeah. Now let me ask you about one game that's catching my eyes, and I'm not predicting anything amazing to happen, but for some reason, in the AAC, it always seems to be a tough game for Cincinnati when they play the University of South Florida. They're much better than the University of South Florida. I don't know if it's a letdown, but guess what happens this week? They play the University of South Florida. I would say, I won't say it's safe to say, but there's a pretty good chance they remain undefeated.
Yeah, I agree with you on this one. I definitely think they stay on. I just can't see an upset happening in this one, but hey, I've been wrong. And this season of college football is one of the most crazy that we've seen since probably like 2007, where we had a 2-loss national champion. I just can't see an upset alert in that game.
Now, Zach, you reported earlier right before we went on the air, and I was going to start with it, but we had Lary Sorenson on. Talk about the latest news and update on what you're hearing about Deion Sanders leaving Jackson State.
Yeah, so I mean, he definitely interviewed for the job, according to 247 Sports and the insiders over at the TCU site. He's still like the fourth prospect or the fourth head coaching prospect on their want list. Sonny Dykes from SMU is their number one get. If they can get him, that's going to be the way they go. They also really want Billy Napier. Tony Elliott has also emerged as a candidate, and also Chris Peterson has expressed his interest. Legendary Boise State and Washington coach. So he did interview, but right now it's looking like Dykes' job to lose as of right now.
Is there any talk or what is the mindset going on in Gainesville, Florida with head coach Dan Mullen right now?
Listen, last week was atrocious. I mean, they fired the D coordinator. They fired the D coordinator in Grantham. Fired the O-line coach. I feel like they're still going to give Mullen 1 year. They said you got to make a move, and that was the move they forced him to make. I could see him having 1 more year, but man, if he drops the game to Florida State, I can see them go ahead and making a move because you cannot lose to Florida State if you're Florida right now. With the trajectory of both of those programs, I think that's going to be the game to determine whether he gets 1 more year to turn it around or not.
And if he was let go, does he get swooped up quickly?
Yeah, probably. I think another Power 5 job would probably scoop him up within 2 weeks, I would imagine.
Yeah. And the other question, and I lost my thought there. Gosh, I hate it when I go brain dead like that. There was another. Oh, I know what it was now. A lot of talk here in Carolina about whether. Are you hearing any talk about Carolina Panthers head coach Matt Rule leaving professional football and going back into college?
He's not going to do that. He might in the future, but not this year. I'd be shocked, and I haven't heard any reports of him wanting to leave where he's at right now with the Panthers, especially with that young team they have right now. Yeah, he might be mentioned as a candidate, just like the Steelers head coach was mentioned as a candidate, but I would imagine that he is not looking to make that move after only 1 year and him finally kind of getting control of where that program is.
Let's jump back to Gainesville for one more moment. Should Mullen be let go? Who is the number 1 candidate to take over there?
Man, I can't tell you, man. I mean, it would also depend on what job openings happened across the country. But
Sure.
what I would imagine is they would try to find someone with SEC experience. That it would probably be the same faces you see for the LSU job. Mel Tucker would be mentioned. James Franklin would be mentioned. Honestly, outside of that, an interesting one might even be Gus Malzahn at UCF. He would probably be mentioned. Luke Fickell potentially. Those would be the names I would imagine sit on the top of the list initially. But I would imagine that Florida hasn't even thought that halfway through yet because I just can't see them getting rid of Mullen a year after making the SEC championship.
Okay, and last but not least, any word on possibly former head coach of LSU, Coach Oregon, getting another shot somewhere?
No, not as of now. I think all the scandals have really scared teams away as of right now of him getting an interview. I think he'll probably pop up as an assistant coach, a coordinator somewhere maybe, but I don't think he has head coach in his future in the next few years at least.
All right. Last but not least, any other games before we wrap it up and call it a night that, FBS games or any other games that have your interest?
So I would probably say Oklahoma State TCU would be interesting to watch, and also Arkansas and LSU would probably be my 2 choices. I think both of those games would be the 2 I would watch in terms of upset alert. We saw what LSU did last week against Alabama. Is Arkansas potentially overlooking them? We know that's a rivalry game for a whole trophy, everything like that. And then on the other side, TCU has a new quarterback. How does Oklahoma State handle that? And could they knock off their second Big 12 championship contender in 2 weeks without their head coach and Gary Patterson? Those are 2 games I think might be underrated storylines going into next week.
All right, my friend. Well, another great week. Look forward to this upcoming week as we have, as you can see, a bunch of games that are really going to clarify the picture in college football by this time next week. So
my bad. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was about to say, I'm pumped for this weekend. I think our college football playoff picture is really going to be shaping up this weekend. You see some of these Big Ten teams starting to have to play each other. These SEC teams have some big tests coming down the stretch. I really think we're going to see some clarity come about who the top 4 teams are in the country.
All right, my friend. Well, until next week, you want another great job on College Football Tuesday. On behalf of myself and Zach, we want to thank Lary Sorenson from Wake Forest football and baseball analyst and former Major League pitcher, for coming on and joining us earlier in the show. And for all of you that are watching us, we want to thank you on Tobacco Road Sports Radio, Facebook, Twitch, YouTube. Thank you very much. And we'll see you again next week, same time, same place. Good night.